None of the things that I'm saying right now are foolproof ways to house birds in an aviary. This is what's worked for me, and these are the steps that I take to minimize risks. Well, hello YouTube. I know, it's been another minute since I filmed a video. It's also been a minute since I used the fancy mood lighting. I'm sorry it's so dark. It's because as soon as it starts to get dark earlier, like as soon as winter and fall start to move in, my daylight gets a lot shorter, as most people's do, except I'm quite high up. So I lose my natural light really quickly, and I could have filmed today, except I was like half doing schoolwork, half watching Descendants for the 8 millionth time, and I just didn't do it. So we're gonna have like a nice little intimate setting. I'm blinding myself with a lamp right now so that my face isn't the color of the Blue Man Group, and this is how we're gonna do it. I'm also wearing a really great shirt that I think is relevant to Trump having coronavirus right now because it says Hex the Patriarchy, but you can't even see it, so what a waste of time. Let's get into the actual topic. So as you can probably tell, I am so excited to finally address this topic for a couple of reasons. Mostly because it's what I get asked about the most online, either out of curiosity or out of judgment, sometimes both. So I would like to clear up some things. Second, I think that it's actually a really great way to keep birds, and I know that opinion in and of itself is somewhat controversial, but that's fine. We're gonna talk about it, and hopefully by the end of my video, you will feel similarly, or at least be open to the fact that maybe I'm not insane in the way that I house my animals. Quick housekeeping note before we really get in too deep here. I don't even know if you can tell, but like the glass on my fish tank is super dirty right now. Like it has a bunch of algae on it, and that's because my clownfish are spawning, and I didn't want to disturb them because when I do, while they're spawning, like during that week, my male clownfish actually jumps out of the tank. So I'm just gonna let them do their thing until they're done, and then I'll go in and scrub it out. It's cool, it's cool, it's cool. Let's move on. Why is my bird setup so controversial? Oh, God, for real. I keep a mixed aviary. So what that is exactly how it sounds. I keep multiple species in the same setup. Yes, they sleep together. Yes, they eat together. Yes, they are hormonal at the same times, or Cusco, which is all the time. I do house my birds together. Large part of the day is unsupervised because I also work full time. Doing it this way for about 9 years, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it. So keeping a mixed aviary is controversial for a couple of reasons, but the primary one is the risk of injury. Different birds of different sizes have different beak sizes. So if you look at Cusco, for example, he is a fisher's lovebird, and although he is actually shorter than my budgies, his beak is the size of their entire face. So if he wanted to, he could do some pretty serious damage to one of my budgies. The opposite end of that, you have birds with varying energy levels. So for example, like my parrotlets are a lot more high energy than Cusco is. So if they go in and are kind of like getting in his way, or he's getting irritated by the fact that they won't settle down, they can become aggressive towards him. So there's always a risk anytime you have birds of different shapes and sizes interacting. There is also always a risk anytime you have the same species being housed together. So that's kind of why people are worried about aviaries, or at least wary of aviaries. I will say there has not been, and I want to be honest about this because I have received a fair amount of flack for cohabbing my birds. As soon as it like comes out that I'm keeping birds together, I do get like a fair amount of questions and a fair amount of like people advising me against it. But to be completely honest, I agree. I think it depends on the individual birds, your setup, and what you're able to commit to. So my aviary itself is 8 feet long, 6.5 feet tall, and about 3.5 feet deep. In there, I keep 4 birds. That varies depending on if we're fostering. If any of my guys are old, I did have to pull Chip, as you guys know, from the aviary last year because he just aged out of it. He couldn't keep up. That number does fluctuate, but I never, ever, ever, ever have I housed more than 4 birds in the aviary. Okay, so now that we've kind of covered how my aviary works and what the potential risks are, which are ultimately injuries, I want to talk about kind of minimizing risks and what that looks like. The biggest thing, and this is regardless of what size enclosure you have, the biggest thing, making sure that you know your bird's behavior. I never put birds into the aviary that I haven't had quite a substantial amount of time to sit down and really get to kind of evaluate and see what their behavior is like. I'll keep them in the same room as my other birds so they can chat back and forth, and maybe share some out of cage time. I always trial them on out of cage time together before I let anyone go into the aviary. But you don't want to just like with a regular bird cage, you don't want to take a bird and just pop them into an aviary with other birds, because they're going to squabble. And if you don't know the bird that you're throwing in, you don't know how they're going to react. They might be really afraid. They might also not be really afraid. They might be quite violent, and you never know. I have had birds in the past that I could not put in the aviary. So Indy, my parrot, if you guys remember way back when, he came from a rescue situation, and he came with a female. They were housed separately because I had been warned that she was very aggressive. She was very aggressive. So I didn't even try her in the aviary, honestly, because as soon as she heard the other birds and as soon as she could see them, she started lunging at the cage bars and, you know, displaying and pinning her eyes and being very, very upfront about the fact that she was not willing to share space with other birds. She has gone on, she's now an only bird to a family who loves her very much, and she does great there, and that works perfect for her. But she's not a bird that I would try in the aviary because she's just not, she's not a fan. She's not a fan of other birds. Another way to minimize risks in an aviary setting is to know the age and kind of limitations of your birds. So either having like a variety of birds that are different ages but kind of within the same energy levels and developmental stages, or having birds that are the same age definitely makes it a lot easier to keep different species together. Even if you have the right birds, it is still really important to make sure that you have enough space. So I've actually had less territoriality issues and aggression issues with the birds in the aviary than I did when they were in cages. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, a cage is a lot smaller, right? So you're taking a space, you're putting a box around it, and you're defining that space for the bird. You're saying this is your spot. And you're putting 1 or 2 birds in there, depending on your species and your cage size, and you're saying, okay, this belongs to you. So what happens is then when you have other species in your home, if you're not sharing out of cage time together, or maybe you are, and one decides to go back in the cage while the others stay out, if another bird lands on top of their cage, they're gonna defend it. Or if you put something on top of their cage, they're gonna defend it. Or if a bird comes into their cage that they don't want in their cage, they're gonna defend it. You're giving them a very clear and concise, this space is yours. And I think that's a really big part of the reason that we deal with cage aggression, even in species that have gotten along together their whole life, or cage mates. Putting them in an extremely unnatural setting, we are restricting their ability to exercise. Even if you let your birds out daily from their cage, they're still getting maybe 1/10 of the exercise that they would be getting in the wild, and that their body instinctively still needs. The longer I keep birds in an aviary, the more pro-aviary I become, because I've actually, knock on wood, never had one single injury in the aviary caused by another bird. Now, I have had birds get injured either sharing out of cage time and climbing on each other's cages, and Cusco. And I've had birds get injured sharing sleep cages or sleeping together in their cage overnight. All of those birds were Nala, in case anyone was wondering. Poor Nala. She started at the top of the flock hierarchy and then just kind of like fell down farther and farther. And this is a fairly new opinion of mine, so I would love to have conversations about it with people. But because they're in an aviary setting, the boundaries of what is their territory are not as concrete as they are in a cage. They don't have a physical barrier saying this space is yours. Instead, they have whole aviary and they all have sections of it that they prefer, but those boundaries are much less clear. And then, you know, when I go in there once a week and rearrange all the toys, those boundaries change. Nobody is ever stuck with their dedicated section. And I've never really had one who became super possessive over one area. Cusco! Sorry about Cusco, you guys. He's really needy today. It's my first day off in like a week, and I've already spent a ton of time with him, but apparently it was not enough. So making sure that they have space where they can get away from each other when they do squabble or when they do feel territorial makes it a lot easier for them to remove themselves from a situation than if they're in a cage and might not actually be able to get far enough away from whoever is bothering them. So for example, if mine are having a day where somebody doesn't feel like sharing a dish, you know, whoever is at the bottom, if they get squeaked at, or if somebody makes a territorial posture at them, they will fly to the other end of the aviary, where I also keep food dishes, and they are fine. On the subject of food, having enough resources, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to eat. What that means is making sure that you have more food dishes available than birds you have in your aviary. In my aviary, I have 4 birds, so I always have 5 dishes of food available, all in different spots of the aviary, so that no one is able to guard like 2 or 3 of them at a time, you know? On top of that, I also keep 3 foragers filled with different foods at all times. So if for some reason they can't get to a free dish, they do have foragers as an option until everyone else has had their meal. They will have a hierarchy, and it's unrealistic to expect them all to share everything all the time, and to expect there to be no one dominant bird. So for example, in my aviary right now, generally it goes matcha, Indy, Cusco, and Kita. And that also comes down to knowing your species. So parrotlets in general are quite defensive and quite territorial, predictably going to be at the top of my hierarchy. Matcha is quite a bit younger than Indy. Indy is 12 and she is 8 months, 6 months, something like that. She's young, she's a baby. So she is younger, she's faster, and she's more energy. So she's gonna be dominant over Indy. Cusco in general isn't super flock oriented. He's very overbonded to me, as we all know. So Cusco is generally 3rd in the order because he's bigger. So Kita is a little bit more intimidated by Cusco. She's young, she's fast, so she generally stays out of everybody's way. Her and Cusco are also pretty amicable with each other, so they will occasionally share dishes and other resources, and it's never been an issue. But understanding your species' tendencies, respecting that those tendencies aren't a guarantee, and then paying attention to your bird's hierarchy and behavior is key to keeping a successful aviary. Like, key. If there's one takeaway from this entire thing, that should be it. So the way I go about introducing aviary birds, I will house new arrivals once they're quarantined. I will house them in my room in their own setups next to the aviary. So that way they can come up and see the new arrival, get to know them a little bit through the bars. They'll chat back and forth. The new arrival will usually like climb up around the cage side that's facing the aviary, that kind of thing. Once they seem comfortable with that, once they're not interested in the new bird anymore, which can take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks, depending on the bird. Once everyone kind of loses interest in the new bird, that's when I'll start opening things up for out of cage time. So I'll let the new bird out first, for a couple of times, like over a few days, so that they can get to know the layout of my room, so that they're not overwhelmed when 4 other birds come flying out of the aviary at them. And so they know their way around the space. And I will let the aviary birds out. I usually will just open the aviary door, and whoever wants to come out can. Cusco. Indy doesn't often come out. Kita will come out if there's someone new. Do that a couple of times. So I'll let them start sharing out of cage time. As long as everything goes smoothly, eventually the new arrival will follow them into the aviary one day. It's happened on its own every single time. And that's when I'll really sit down like right next to the aviary and really keep a close eye on what's going on, to make sure that there's no scuffles and nothing beyond like the standard like pecking order establishment. I'll let them spend time in the aviary on and off over a period of days or weeks, depending on how well the bird is adjusting and how well the flock are adjusting. And then usually it's a good like 4 to 6 months before I'll really let them like sleep in the aviary together. Alright, so when I told you guys I was getting ready to make this video, I did also open this up to questions, because I do get a lot of questions. And I did get a fair few questions. Okay, shut up, Ariel. So, questions you guys had about my aviary setup. I really liked this one. Are your birds able to communicate effectively despite their differences? And this is a resounding yes. Probably my favorite thing about the aviary is how the flock almost builds their own dialect. So all of the birds do learn each other's sounds. So Kita can do, as a budgie, can do perfect parrotlet and lovebird sounds, and vice versa. They all know each other's sounds of their species, but they also know the sounds that are unique to those individual birds, which is really sweet, because obviously Chip and Nala have since, you know, gotten old and passed away, but every so often the others will make those sounds. And so I hear the birds that I had years ago, and it's honestly like one of the best parts of having everybody together is, you know, I haven't seen Nala since 2019 in the spring, but a couple times a day somebody makes her sounds and they're identical. And so that's really, really cool, and something that I used to make me cry a lot, but I really treasure it now. And I think that's a really special thing that you don't get when you own other species of pets like cats or dogs. They do all communicate effectively. They all have, birds don't just communicate by voice, obviously. They have body posture, they have all kinds of different behaviors and ways that they use to communicate, and my guys all communicate just fine. Some of you wanted to know if some of the birds are closer to each other than others, and that is a resounding yes as well. So Cusco is close with Kita. He was close with Indy before Matcha moved in there, and now Indy and Matcha are bonded, so he's not as close with Indy, although they're still amicable. Like, they still feed each other and preen each other from time to time. But he does hang out with Kita for a bit. They preen each other. He doesn't feed her, but they do play. They share toys together. They'll do like flybys back and forth in the aviary together or in my room. They do definitely like have preferences for each other, for sure. Kita and Matcha, like, I wouldn't say they dislike each other, but they're definitely like neutral. They don't really have a relationship. They mostly ignore each other. Matcha and Cusco mostly ignore each other. Indy's friends with just about everybody. He gets annoyed with Kita because sometimes she won't like stop leaving him alone. She pesters the birds a lot because she likes to be chased. Like, it's a hilarious game for her. Cusco is actually very tolerant of Kita's shenanigans, which is hilarious to me because Cusco himself is super high maintenance. Someone asked if any of them have different diets and how I handle feeding. So right now my guys actually are getting mash, which I am stopping tomorrow because it's hormone season. Don't feed soft foods when it's hormone season. Doesn't matter what the temperature is, like people tell you, literally just don't feed them because they all think it's regurgitated nonsense. I feed my guys a variety of everything. When Chip was on medication, I did keep him separate. And when Nala was on Baytril, she stayed in the aviary, but I would bring her out at Baytril time twice a day, and I'd put the Baytril on some millet and she would eat it that way. So then that way I knew she was getting her meds and they weren't going to anybody else. So in that same vein, same person wanted to know, besides observations, how do you know they're eating well? So I weigh all my birds. I weigh them all once a week, and so I know if anybody's gaining or losing weight, and I do that for two reasons. First, to make sure that they're getting enough to eat, that they're not sick, and also to help regulate hormones. Birds, male and female, gain on average about 5 grams when they become hormonal, and that's because they're stockpiling for breeding preparation. So if I see all of a sudden that all of my birds shot up 5 grams in a week, then I know that in a couple of days they're all going to be hormonal little nightmares. So that's generally how I make sure that they're eating well. And that started last year, actually, when I noticed that Chip, because he was getting older and couldn't really keep up, was getting picked on in the aviary at meal times by Kita. Pulled him and weighed him, and he had lost weight. And I felt super guilty for not catching it sooner, so then I started just weighing everybody weekly. So now I know if anyone's not getting enough to eat or is getting too much of the wrong things. Like, I also sit and watch them eat their entire breakfast, so I know if someone's eating like all the sunflower seeds and leaving the rest. Indy's so bad for that. I know if somebody is getting kind of like the scraps, that kind of thing. So then I'll just kind of tailor what I'm feeding and when I'm feeding it to make sure that everybody gets kind of their best shot nutritionally. Last question is, have I had any accidents? And I know I already covered this, but I feel like it's worth saying because I get this question all the damn time. Which is fine. Honestly, it's a valid question. Have I had any accidents? No. I have never had an aviary accident, knock on wood, and I entirely attribute that to them being able to get away from each other when they need to. And of course, there's always going to be times where they don't get away quick enough. I'm not saying that the way I house my birds is foolproof at all. That's not the point or the takeaway from this video. But it is definitely working well for them. And like I said earlier, I've had way more situations when they are being housed separately than I have when they're being housed together. And I entirely attribute that to them being able to get away from each other and for them not being able to establish concrete boundaries of territory within the aviary. Alright, you guys, that's going to be it for this video. Sorry, I just had to slide back. My back was like killing me sitting on the edge of my bed. Hope this cleared up some of the questions that you have about keeping a mixed aviary. Frankly, I started out thinking that it wasn't a setup that I'd recommend for other people and that I would just take it on like a case-by-case basis. And I do believe in keeping it. as a case-by-case basis and not chucking random birds in there. But the more I read about aviaries and the more I read about other people's experiences and how similar they are to mine, I do really think that this is a husbandry style that shouldn't necessarily be being shot down without people giving it a try, because it is a much more naturalistic setting. It gives your birds so much more opportunity to exercise. They're less territorial and aggressive with each other because they have more time and space to exercise. They tire each other out. It provides more foraging opportunities. It's been so much better for them. You know, if I'm busy for a day and don't have a chance to let them out, it doesn't make me feel super guilty because I know that they are cooped up in a box. It has been so much more enriching for them, and I've seen the benefits in their behavior and in their enthusiasm and also in their coping mechanisms. My birds can tolerate a lot of different situations because they've been exposed to them in the comfort of their own space. I don't know, it just giving them that flock dynamic, I really, really believe that has been much more beneficial than housing them separately, and I truly believe that the benefits have outweighed the risk. All risk is calculated whether you're housing birds in a cage or an aviary or a bird room, and I hope that this video helps open that dialogue a little bit, and I hope that if you are considering having an aviary for your birds, that this kind of helps you with your decision making. And if I can help make that transition easier for any of you guys, then honestly, that's worth the flack that I get for it online. So I hope this was helpful. I hope at the very least it was interesting and it clears some stuff up for you. And I will see you in the next video.